Okay. Nice. Hi, everyone. We are still waiting for more people to join because it takes a little bit time till everyone gets the access. So let's hang out another 5 minutes maybe till we start. Nice. It's very nice to see you, or like not see you, but that you're joining us. I think there are many friends of Shum and many friends of Daniel and Sophie within the, or I could see that there are within the guest list. So it's a really nice round. If you want, you can say hello within the chat and exchange your greetings, ideas. Yeah, nice. Hi, Stefan. Nice. Hello, hello. So I'm really looking forward to this panel today because I think it will be really exciting with you two guys. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about the market today.
Sure.
People are still joining. Yeah. Two more minutes and then I will start the official hello. Yes. People are still joining. Nice. Nice. Okay, so I would say let's go. So yeah, welcome to GamesNet Insight. I'm very happy to welcome all of you here. To anyone who don't know me, my name is Maria Wagner and I organized this event on behalf of GamesNet and its partners, Riot Games, Game Duel, Ubisoft and Stratosphere Games. And of course, on behalf of its founder, Median Board. I'm very happy to welcome our guests here, Shum Singh, the Managing Director and founder of Agnitio Capital, and of course, Daniel Stammler, the CEO and co-founder of Kolibri Games. And you're very lucky that I'm not hosting this event today, but Sophie Vo, the studio lead of Voodoo Games. She's also the founder of Play and Rise. And recently, she also started to be active as an angel investor or like being active in this round. So she will have the right questions for the two guys here and extract basically the knowledge of studio acquisition out of this guys. So yeah, have a lot of fun. If you have any questions, please drop the questions in the Q&A function. We will answer the questions by the end of the panel. We have 40 minutes panel and like 15 minutes Q&A. And yeah, with no further ado, now I hand over to Sophie and enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Hi, everyone. Excited also like to be hosting my first panel here and to talk about the hot topic of studio acquisition today with Shum and Daniel. And a bit of a further intro about Shum first, for the people who don't know more about him. So as Maria mentioned, Shum founded Agnitio Capital in 2003. You have close to 25 years of technology-focused mergers and acquisition expertise, having worked in both New York and London, and now you are like in which city? Vilnius, right? And Shum is an investor and board director of Innova Intellectual Properties, and recently sold to Enet Global 7 for 110 million euro. And Eric Labs Limited, and Zwiper GmbH and Tower Pop, if some names are familiar to you. And a bit about Daniel here. Daniel is the CEO and co-founder of Kolibri Games, mobile games company that you founded in 2016 in a student flat with your other co-founders. So a very so exciting story and journey of how, you know, a game company can get started. And in 4 years, you have grown your Berlin-based team to over 100 people, generated 125 plus million download with your games like Idol, Minor Tycoon, and sold the company to a big giant company, as we know, Ubisoft, at a valuation of 160 million euro. So very excited to have you two as very strong professional in the industry, part of this panel. And sorry, to begin with, let's start more with an overview on the current market situation, maybe with you, Shum. So it would be great first to have really more an overview of the landscape. And if you could share a few words on giving an introduction on Agnitio Capital and you know, what you're doing there, the services you have. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Sophie. So yeah, I mean, I think Agnitio Capital, what we really do is provide investment banking services. So we essentially work with a lot of game studios, particularly founder-owned and founder-led studios, and really help position them for an exit to some of the largest publishers worldwide. And you know, we've sold studios to like Daniel, to Ubisoft, to Nexon in Asia, Gameville. In Europe, to companies like Stillfront, Embracer, EG7, on the West Coast to companies like Scopely. So really, we've been exclusively focused on the industry for many, many years, and that's kind of the strength of our relationships. As Sophie mentioned, I'm also been an active investor and have invested in about 15 studios over the years. Some of the more successful ones that you might know about is Hutch Games. I was a seed investor in there, which recently sold end of last year for just under $400 million to MTG. But let's talk about the market. And I think that's what we're all really excited about. I think in the last, particularly with the advent of COVID, there's been just an unprecedented amount of not only interest, but funds, both private and public, that have just gone into the gaming industry, irrespective of platform. So there is interest not only just in mobile, which has been obviously significantly driving a lot of the growth in recent years, but there's been interest on all platforms, whether it's console, PC, mobile, and in terms of business model as well. So from premium titles to ad-driven business models to IAP-driven models. So I think across the spectrum, you're seeing interest from a wide range of investors. It's also not just going to some of the larger players. It's also going to early stage startups right from the get-go. You're seeing a lot of activity and a lot of interesting studios being started, not just in Europe, but also in North America and other parts of the world. So I think we're in this, I would say, real peak period or almost blossoming period of the games industry, where I think finally a lot of investors that over, I recall 10, 15 years ago when I would approach them, they had a very different view of the industry. They thought it was just a fad. They thought it was just, something that little kids played, or, bedroom developers, or, awkward, nerdy kids. And that has completely changed. Let's be honest here. The games industry is an industry that appeals to everyone, irrespective of demographic profile, irrespective of age, irrespective of gender. So I think that there are games now that appeal and that have niche offerings across the board. And you're seeing that also with respect to the larger players now understanding that they need to broaden their portfolios, broaden their reach, broaden the platforms that they already operate on. And so that's led to this unprecedented amount of M&A activity across the value chain, right? So whether you're doing small deals, whether you're doing mid-sized deals, whether you're doing large deals. Last year was one of the most successful years in terms of announced M&A deal volume ever in the games industry. And the reality is the majority of those deals were smaller deals, and I think there's a lot of interest from bigger players into acquiring smaller studios. I think we can get into some of the reasons for that later in the conversation, but I think as a kind of overarching general view, the market is incredibly hot. There's more and more big, large studios going public, both in Europe and the US, that are going to continue to acquire a lot of these smaller studios across the value chain.
Thanks for the overview. And maybe going a bit deeper in the market overview here, the last year has been definitely a big year for a lot of M&A, like companies acquiring companies that are being acquired. And what is your view on the big players of acquisition, which we start to see emerging through the press and through the acquisition list? But I'm curious as well to hear from you. What's your view on the big players at the moment?
Question for me or for
you, Shum?
Okay. Yeah. So I think that big players will always be opportunistic, right? Whether it's Microsoft, and they made an acquisition of Bethesda Networks, the largest deal last year of $7.5 billion. The reality is there's not that many billion-dollar plus companies available. There certainly are some around, but a lot of them are just very happy remaining private, or are actually potentially wanting to become big acquirers themselves. So I think that for a lot of those big deals, I think they'll definitely be out there. And I think hopefully there'll be some that will be announced this year as well. But I think what you're starting to see right now is a lot of the smaller deal activity, sort of in the range of 50 to a couple $100 million. And so for the really large players like a Microsoft, like a EA or Activision or et cetera, they're going to wait until those $billion plus opportunities arise. That's not to say that they're not talking. I'm sure they're possibly looking at some players right now, maybe even some of the Swedish listed companies, who've been really, really acquisitive. Some of the bigger guys in the US or Asia might be looking to acquire them. Who knows? So I think that there's always going to be a certain level of interest from the bigger guys, but their preference tends to be, companies that have been around for a long time, that really have a clear expertise in maybe a particular genre or platform, and a real seasoned management team that have been around and working together for many years. That's what's really attractive to some of the bigger players. So when they acquire that company, they say, great, let's use an example. When EA acquired Codemasters last year, they said, great, we're buying a very seasoned management team here, a company that's been around for, 30 years in the UK, that's always had this incredible world-leading racing game DNA. And so there's a real strategic rationale as to why they want to acquire that business, because they were missing that racing game, genre. And so now they can just broaden their portfolio. So I think if there are companies out there like that for some of the bigger players, then yeah, they'll continue to do those deals. But now a lot of the opportunities, you're looking at much more diversified companies, right? They might not necessarily have just a very specific focus or platform focus.
Interesting. And you mentioned some of the criteria for the big players in acquiring studios or companies. So talking more here about your own strategy at your company, how do you evaluate studios, company for potential candidate for acquisition? What are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think that, a lot of that sometimes is dictated by what the large publishers want, right? I mean, they always want the best possible studio with no weaknesses, even, and the perfect deal and not to pay much. But the reality is, I think you have to see yourself and believe what are the capabilities, what's the future potential of the studios you want to work with. So I think there's a combination of factors that we look at. I mean, the most important is probably the team. Does the team have a track record? Are they really hungry, ambitious? Are they willing to go that extra mile? How interested are they in innovating, in creating evergreen content? Do they have the necessary skill sets? Are they just, are they only technology led, or are they only content led? Do they have a good broad base skill sets internally? And they don't have to, but as long as they aspire to gain maybe those different functional areas of expertise, I think these are the sort of attributes, the characteristics we look for. Of course, there has to be certain financial performance. I mean, obviously, the more profitable a company is, that helps. The more growth. The real, really important thing for us is how much are these businesses growing? Are they continuing to grow? Are they continuing to release new product successfully? These are all real critical factors, I think, that we look for.
Okay, thank you. And before we move to a few questions to Daniel, I had one last about this criteria you look at when you acquire a studio. Are there some situations where would you look at studios even if they are not profitable or don't have any financial? Because we talk about the teams here, and the reality these days, I talk to a lot of studios that prototyping, testing in the market, but they haven't scaled yet. Are you looking into like these early profile companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think from an M&A perspective, it's going to be tough. From a personal interest, I think it's fantastic. I mean, and that's why I've personally invested in, 15 studios over the years, and a lot of them very early stage. I invested in Hutch when there was 4 founders, and like Daniel, they were working out of one of the founders' bedrooms, more than 7 years ago. And, they've had tremendous success and seen them grown literally from nothing, and, had tough times and good times, along the way. It's a really incredible journey. So I think from a personal interest, yes. I think from an M&A perspective, it's going to be difficult, right? I think at that stage, a company that's prototyping, even if they have a phenomenal team and track record, they're probably best served raising money from, some of the really well-known gaming VC funds out there that can help them, scale, that can help them with a lot of strategic guidance to hopefully one day become, successful and be very attractive to buyers.
Okay, thanks. So Daniel, now I have a bunch of questions as well for you, representing more of the other side of on the studio work and recently acquired. So maybe the first burning question is, now that you're still like one foot still at Kolibri, how do you feel like now you have like the studio has been acquired, is in good hands, you're moving on? How are you feeling these days?
So for me, it always has one good side and one bad side. Of course, the good side of being acquired is in the end you get a huge check and you know that the company has a bright future ahead, has a stable future ahead. Now being part of Ubisoft, it's very clear that it's not about what happens in the next few months, but it's about what happens in the next few years. And Ubisoft is a big, well-established partner. It gives a lot of confidentiality, a lot of like security into how things will work in the future. Of course, like and one other good thing about being acquired for us personally, or for us as a company, was that everybody in the company had virtual shares, so all the employees also benefited. And in the end, in total, we paid multiple millions just for the team in ESOPs. So on the day when we announced the acquisition, everybody was super happy, both because Ubisoft is a great partner, but also because not only we as founders profited financially, but also the team profited, and basically all their efforts were paid off. So that's one side. On the other side, of course, you kind of like, and especially now that we are leaving Kolibri Games from our day-to-day roles, it kind of like feels like when your baby is growing up and is leaving the house. We are proud on what we've built. We know that Kolibri Games is a great company. It's something, it's kind of like our life's work. We would never have imagined that we were able to build something so big. And now it's strong enough to live on its own without us being there. Of course, it's also a bit sad because that's what our life consisted of in the last 5 years. Every day when we woke up, of course, the first thoughts were about Kolibri Games. How can we make the company bigger? How can we make the games more successful? How can we make the team happier? And now, so we're still there. So we need to see how it feels then in May. But I think there will be a big hole at the same time, and we need to see and need to fill that hole then in the future.
Yeah, can imagine. Mixed feelings, but very great as well. And then how to move on from there, like how to live a life after after being in this really intense journey. And maybe to understand more as well, like the whole journey as it to the point you are today. Could you walk us through a bit the process of how, when you started to maybe consider acquisition? I don't know if Ubisoft was your only interlocutor, and then, what are the steps until you made the decision and where you are today? If you could walk us through.
Sure, of course. So basically, once we reached a certain level of success and Isle Tycoon was visible to the outside world, we started talking, catching up with potential investors and other gaming firms. Some of them, or most of them, reached out to us at some point, and we built relationships with them over the years. So this whole process, of course, in the end, it was very focused, but basically, if you want to say so, it went over 3 years or so, where we got to know a lot of other companies. We learned a lot about what they want, what kind of games, what kind of companies fit to what kind of big players out there. And then this process went on and went on. However, for a long time, we didn't think that it's the right time to actually start a proper process. Then at some point in 2019, we thought about a lot about like, okay, how should the future look like? And also knowing that our team has a lot of stake in the company, and we as well, we never had any investors. We never had like board meetings or anything. And then we decided that it might be a good time to actually look for a big partner to kind of like grow the company up, to professionalize the company, to be able to do things like be more present in China, which was not possible for us as a small team to open an actual local office there. So we decided to look for a partner who's a good partner and can actually like help us to bring the company on the next level. And to do this, we used an investment bank, just like Agnitio from Shum, because for us it was clear that we want to run a professional process. We as founders, we don't come from the financial side. So we, of course, learned over the years how the financial aspects work and so on, but we don't have any banking or finance background. So it was clear we need professional partners on our side. And we also hired our CFO back then, Ross, who worked at Luga before and went through an exit process there. So it was important for us to get the right partners on our side to be able to actually then do this properly. And maybe even more important about this decision to get partners on board, to work with an investment bank and to actually hire a CFO just for this process, was that this enabled us as founders to focus on the pure business performance. Because of course, the worst thing that can happen is that you run a process, you talk to potential partners, and then your numbers start to go down because all you're thinking about every day is actually to find a potential partner and to pitch the company, be in meetings, work with spreadsheets and build models, because in the end, this doesn't create immediate value for the business. So basically for us, the tasks where we make sure that the numbers are good, that the company is in good health, that everything is running smoothly, and we let the bankers and our CFO do all the other things. And of course, we were still in the process itself. So basically how this works is you go to your bank, you tell them you're ready now, then they start talking to potentially interesting companies. Then eventually you meet them, and then you kind of like learn quickly who is actually interested and who is not. So while we're doing this, we were not so much on the financial side, but more like on the person-to-person side. So of course, in the end, there are a few companies that were interested in working with us, and we met them personally. We spent a lot of time with them to kind of like get a feeling for them, to see if the cultures actually fit, because of course, in the end, money is one thing, and you probably wouldn't sell to a company that offers much less than everybody else. But at the same time, the culture is also very important, because you need to work with them in the future. And also for us personally, as this is our life's work, we want Kolibri to be successful in 10 years and 20 years and to have a good future. So it was also important to try to figure out who would be a good fit in the end to actually work with in the long run, and not only pay good money. So, and this went on over the months. And of course, like there are things like term sheets, exclusivity, and so on, and negotiations, which were luckily covered by the bank and by our CFO. So from our side, it was more like talking to people, getting to know the companies, and focusing on Kolibri Games and just running Kolibri Games.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and that's a very conscious approach to have, I would say, delegated that part as well as you keep the company afloat, because that's the main important thing as you are seeking for new opportunities as well, acquisition. And you mentioned about like some considerations that were important for you, of course, considering different partners for acquisition. You mentioned culture, also the financial, that it has, of course, to match the calculation. Can you mention what were really the key consideration you had for selecting a partner and that led you to go with Ubisoft in the end, more specifically?
Yep. Sure. So for us, it was clear that if we have a new owner in the end, we need to feel comfortable with them, and we need to have the feeling that they will do the right decisions for Kolibri Games as a company. And in the end, so I don't want to talk bad about any other company, but what was good about Ubisoft in the end was we visited them in Paris. We spent a full day with Yves, the Ubisoft CEO. We talked a lot about how to approach things, how to build a company, how to manage teams, how to build or how to work with other people. And we really felt that they have a similar mindset than we have. And we also talked to some other companies that have maybe a more aggressive culture when it comes towards people, or a more aggressive culture when it comes towards like how hard do you want to push, and how do you want to communicate. So for us, it felt like Ubisoft is a good partner because we were kind of like on a good wavelength with each other. Whereas with some others, it felt more like, okay, they are paying money, but then they wouldn't be able to help us in any way. And also it wouldn't be fun to work with them, but only annoying to work with them. So, but I think this, in the end, this comes down a lot of like, you have two company cultures and do they fit or do they not fit? And of course, Ubisoft's company culture is very different than ours, but I still had the feeling that we are compatible on like the core values. But I think you can't, it's impossible to say this without actually meeting the team and meeting the people. So for other companies, I'm sure that there will be other partners out there that could maybe be a better fit for the cultural aspect. And also with Ubisoft, one practical aspect was, as this was pre-pandemic, We thought it's good that they are in Paris because it's very easy to visit them and to jump on a quick flight. Whereas if you need to fly to the US, to San Francisco or LA or to China, it's much harder to actually meet in person. And back then we thought that meeting in person will be very important in the future. So this was also important for us.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And following up more than on the question of culture, that seemed very important in the core values. And I speak here also by observation. Also, I haven't been in companies that have been acquired, or only after I left, unfortunately, at Wooga, and the review went public. But one thing I know is that it changes the company after acquisition. For the best or the worst, but it does. And what I'm interested in is like hearing, with of course what you know today, what are the points of concerns or of the observation that you have through an acquisition, and it will just take time, you know, of course, to see. But if you're open to share, you know, this reality of acquisition as well, you know, it's not just honeymoon. What are the reality and the concerns you may have around it?
So when we joined Ubisoft, we agreed with them that Kolibri Games will run as an independent company. And this was very important for us, both because for us personally or in the leadership team, they didn't want to be integrated into a huge corporation, but they wanted to work at a 100 people company. But also because I believe that this is the right way to make the company or to grow Kolibri Games and keep Kolibri Games successful. Because I think Kolibri Games is not a company that you can just plug into a huge corporation. And actually Ubisoft agrees. So Ubisoft also thinks that Kolibri Games should be run independently. So basically Kolibri Games in itself is quite shielded, and all the people that work on the product, work on marketing, they are not in contact with Ubisoft. So this means that the culture inside the production teams, inside the marketing teams, inside technology is as it was before, because they don't even have like contact to Ubisoft, and all the contact is funneled through like us or through HR or through the finance department, which obviously needs to report some numbers. So this was the first key. But one thing that actually changed, but for the better, was, and that before we were acquired by Ubisoft, we only had one big game, Elmer Tycoon. We had a second game on the market, Idle Factory Tycoon, but that wasn't like a big game. It didn't have a big support team behind it. And we actually, in all those 4 years before the acquisition, we never even tried building another game. Because for us, not having any investors, not coming like from rich families or whatever, we didn't want to risk the success that we had. So we focused everything on Idle Tycoon, because it was clear that Idle Tycoon is the game that basically pays the bills. Idle Tycoon is a game that gets companies like Ubisoft to talk to us, and we don't want to risk that, because by building new games, by defocusing, because maybe it works and we double our value, but maybe it doesn't work and Idle Tycoon goes down, and then we have a huge problem. So this led to us only focusing on Idle Tycoon and not spending any minute thinking about building new games. However, after the acquisition, it became clear for us that if we want Kolibri Games to be successful in the long run, in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, we need to start building new games. And being part of huge corporation like Ubisoft then enabled us to think much more long term. So because it was clear that it doesn't really matter what happens in 3 months or in 6 months. If numbers go down for a few months, because we need to take some talented people from our flagship game and put them onto new games, it's okay for Ubisoft. They actually encouraged us to do long-term investments, because from their perspective, being a huge and old company, they don't care so much about the near future, they care about the long term. And this was a super nice feeling for us to actually kind of like be able to take one step back and think about what do we actually want to do, how do we want to plan our future. So then we decided to invest heavily into new games. We set up a few MVP teams to build new games and to plan how things should go. And we are already now 1 year after, we are at 30% roughly revenue coming from new games. So it's already paying off, but we would not have dared to do that before the acquisition because it would have been too risky. And then if you run an acquisition and you have some games that are on the market or in soft launch but not yet proven, then the focus will always be on the new games. So running through the acquisition, the focus was fully on Elemental Tycoon, but now being part of Ubisoft, the one thing that actually changed was for us to be able to take more risk, to go one step back and actually decide to heavily invest into new product and new technology, because we basically have the ability to take the risk now.
Great. It sounds like a great partnership in the end, and great story as well. So congratulations again. Amazing as well journey for Kolibri. And now switching back a bit also to Shum about what we just discussed. So we look at more of a market overview of studio acquisition and experience here for Daniel and Kolibri on one particular studio acquisition. For you, Shum, based on your experience, how has been your experience in these concerns? You know, through acquisition, there's always studios that are a bit afraid of losing their freedom, culture. How do you accompany the studio through this process? Yeah, what have been your experience there?
You know, every studio is different.
Mm-hmm.
Every studio has its own unique culture. You know, some might be more technology led, some might be more creative led, some, you know, might be very sensitive to what they've built, especially if they've been doing it for a very long time. You know, and other founders might be less concerned, right? I think there's a whole range of both personal and professional considerations that you know dictate how important, you know, your company culture is. If I look at the last 6 deals we've done, you know, in the last 15 months, all of them have been founder-led organizations, like Daniel's. You know, all of them have been owned 100. Well, only in the case of 2, but all of them were majority owned by the founders. Most of them had been going for more than 10 years, so they had a very entrenched, you know, very proud company culture. Pretty much in every conversation we had, before we even started trying to even think about who would be a good acquirer, we like to spend time with the studio, really get to know them. As I said, really understand both from a professional and personal perspective, what is it they're looking for? And what do they want to protect? Do they want to protect the culture? Do they want to protect the employees? Do they want to maintain creative control? You know, do they want to remain independent? Do they want to be able to pivot or transition if maybe a certain game is not relevant, or they feel, you know what, it's just not going to work, and we have this completely new, interesting idea, you know, and have a belief in it. So I think one of the major reasons why we've done a lot of deals with predominantly European-based acquirers, publishers, has been because they take a very decentralized approach to working with independent players. They've been very, you know, thoughtful. They've been very sensitive, protective of the companies they acquire and maintaining that company culture. So I think that there's obviously a lot of probably stories that people have heard of, especially when I'm looking back 15, 20 years ago. The industry was very different then. You did not have any of these European acquirers. You had very different relationships. It was predominantly console players who were dictating to pretty much everybody else, developers, you know, hey, you can do a work for hire project for us or some sort of co-development type arrangement. And often you were at the mercy of those console publishers. And a lot of them had a very different approach. When you were acquired by them, you did everything their way. You know, you did, you know, from HR, from financial reporting, from things such as what games you could work on. So everything changed dramatically, and I think obviously a lot of transactions back then didn't necessarily end up favorably for both parties. And so I think the industry learned. It went through a period of reflection and looking at themselves in the mirror saying, hang on, maybe we're not doing this right. Creativity can come from anywhere. And rather than telling people, prescribing them a certain way to do something, let's take a step back and let's find a way to nurture that creativity. And so I think a lot of the Europeans have paved the way for that, particularly from Sweden, as well as in the UK. And now you're starting to see it in the US as well. People realize if you want to, especially find really good, talented developers and keep them around and motivate them beyond even their earnouts, if that's something that they want to do and remain in the company, then you have to preserve that culture. You have to be sensitive to them. You have to let them run the company. You have to give them and allow them to maintain creative control and independence. So it's taken time. And I can tell you it's much easier now having conversations than it was 10, 15 years ago when I was doing this, which is great. Great not only for us, great for our clients, great for the publishers. So I think now when I look back at it, it was tough back then, but at least now it's a much better situation.
Right, and it's really nice to hear the evolution of this. I think what you have described is really like the old fears and updating it a bit with also adaptation to the reality. If we want to make a good business, growing together as partners, what does it imply in terms of certain independence and preserving the DNA of a company acquired? Great. And as we're closing also the questions, I have maybe one last for Daniel, and then we can open it for the Q&A. So we talked about acquisitions, but Daniel, now you're a kind of a free to go, like redefining what's next for you. So we understand that you are started as well, like looking into or even started already an angel investing activity. Can you tell us more about that? How your experience with Kolibri has, inspired you or will influence how you will approach investing yourself?
Sure. So basically, when we invest, we do both gaming and non-gaming investments. I would say roughly 50-50. But I think for today, the gaming side is obviously more interesting. And there, obviously, we know how to run a gaming company. We know how user acquisition works, how LTV versus CPI works, and so on. So for us, when we invest in gaming companies, we try to look for a target where we can actually add value to the equation, where we know that the team itself is capable of building and running the company, but where we as investors actually bring something to the table besides being dumped money. And that's very important for us because this is our expertise. This is the field where we know things. However, it's also important to kind of like find the right balance, because obviously in the end, the founding team still needs to run the company on their own and not depend on us too much to, like, I don't know, tell them how to schedule campaigns or whatever. So that's the sweet spot there. And also there, also on the gaming side, we try then therefore also to invest in the space where we know how things work. So it's usually free to play mobile. So far, we didn't do any PC console investments because, to be honest, we can't really add a lot of value, which is gaming specifically. So we try to not do that.
Mm-hmm. Same question I asked also at Shum previously is like, how open are you to invest in very early stage companies as well? Like when they don't necessarily have, proof of traction yet, but you see the team, you see what they can build, execute, but they are not there yet.
Yeah. So on the non-gaming side, we do not invest pre-product because there it's too hard. On the gaming side, it's also very hard to invest pre-product or pre-market because it's super hard to predict if a game is going to be successful or not. But at least on the gaming side, we we at least think that we sometimes understand the market and can have a good feeling about if a product has the potential to be successful or not. So sometimes we invest pre-product, but only then if we know the team well and know what they're capable of or not. It's very hard to invest in a team which is pre-product or pre-market that you didn't know before, because in the end you get like hundreds of those pitch decks. Yeah. And they all look good. You talk to the teams, and especially me as a founder, I'm always very optimistic about teams, and especially since we also, so our background was very atypical for investments or VCs, because from our side, nobody built a game before, nobody worked at a gaming company before. We just decided to go into it. So we were kind of like the exception. And I try to think of that when investing in a company as well, that maybe they will have the chance, but then again, you can't invest in every gaming company which has a nice founding team. So basically pre-product, the only case when we do this when we know the team well and have a high conviction in the product itself.
Yeah, it's in the end a very personal, like I'm starting also investment, it's a personal investment, right? So like what are the criteria that are comfortable for you and what you believe in the end in investing, and there are different stages. Okay, so thanks Shum and Daniel. Let's open it for some Q&A. And so I have a first question here from Seb. Thank you. What are your red flags when looking at teams? So maybe first Shum, as you're like directly investing, and if Daniel, you want to add something after as an angel investor, but let's start with Shum first.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is from an investor perspective, let's see. I mean, I think Daniel already touched upon a few subjects, if we're looking at gaming specific opportunities, we've been in the industry for many years, so we have a pretty broad network. We tend to only really invest in teams that we've known previously, or at least have contacts or people in the industry that know them extremely well, that might have worked with them at a previous studio, that can really vouch for them. So generally speaking, when it comes to an early stage venture, like Daniel, it's very risky, and especially now, given how competitive the market is across all platforms. So where things get a lot easier for us is if we've already known the team, if they have a little bit of traction, and if we don't, then do we know someone that we trust really well, that knows them, that can vouch for them. So that's kind of the approach we take to early stage investments.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so one thing that I saw quite often in gaming now is if there are teams that basically just want to build their game of their dream, the game of their dreams, instead of building a game which works for the market. Mm. Because in the end, of course, you need to love what you're doing, and you need to build a game that, or you should maybe build a game that you also like personally. But in the end, if you don't understand that it's a business, in the end, you need to have customers, you need to have happy customers that are willing to pay. And just because you like a certain game and you worked on it for years in your head, this doesn't mean that it has the potential to be successful. So this would be a red flag for me.
Yeah, I would add to that as well, as I'm looking into investment, is really having the business mindset. It's a very competitive market, and there's a hard reality around game development, and being business savvy is quite important. Like the reality of what is the business around the games, and testing fast as well. For me, is if especially as early company, if you take, I don't know, a year to develop your perfect product and see what happens, it's, for me personally, also a red flag, where you have to test fast and see how it resonates with the market. Okay, it looks like we don't have any further questions, but actually there is one just popped. So from Christine Stefan, does the fact that a team got an award or was funded, so game fund or medium board, influence your interest, in particular if pre-publication or pre-product? Okay, so as I get the question, I'll rephrase. In case you don't have traction or something published as a game, the fact that you get an award or funded previously by other type of funds, government funds, is it a sign to be worthy of more investment?
I mean, look, I think getting an award, receiving, recognition by your peers is great, but I think we're all saying the same thing here. You really need to have a business model that is going to appeal to either a very specific demographic, or you've noticed a gap in the market, right? And you've gone after that. So I think we're saying all the same things. If you're commercially minded, if you've found a niche in the market or a gap in the market, or an evergreen product that you think is going to appeal to a lot of people, and you have a clear monetization strategy, that's what you should be focusing on, not showing, hey, we won this great award. I mean, that's nice, it's great, but that's not why an investor is going to get excited.
Yeah, thanks. And a question from Inka. Did you had an investment where you were skeptical in the beginning, but that turned out very successful in the end? That's an interesting question. Shum.
I'm trying to think. I unfortunately have not had that happen to me in the 15 sort of gaming investments I've made. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. There's been, in fact, I would say the opposite. There was many companies that I invested in early on that I thought were going to be very successful, and for a whole range of reasons, right, which you can't foresee, things unfortunately didn't work out. So, I think that usually going into an investment, I'm always excited. I would never invest in something that I was not 100% really, strongly convinced would succeed. So in at least in my case, that's never happened.
Yeah. And I would add to that, actually, the reality is like, it's more the other way. It's like, you cannot foresee, and it's a risky, always a risk you take when you invest. So most of the time it will actually not go anywhere than actually higher success rate. That's part of what is investment. You manage your risks. And another question is, having a certain amount of debt a problem? I guess, if I understand this well, and Seb, please clarify if it's not what I will be saying. Like, if you're a company that have debts, is it like problems to get investment? Yes, okay, that's the question. So if you're a company with a certain level of debt already, is it like a red flag or a problem to then receive investment?
I don't think so. Again, whether you raised venture debt or a loaner or something of that nature, I don't really think it's going to not be attractive. I think, again, as we've been saying, what's the most important thing is what's the team, what's the kind of game that you're focused on. Have you found a gap in the market? Is there a particular genre focus? Is there some sort of evergreen or unique, +1 innovation you've come up with that is going to really distinguish your product from others that are out there in the market? I mean, I think that's generally what's going to be most important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. No further questions. I do have one though, as we talked here about M&A. And something we talked earlier in the questions, what are the situations where, let's say I'm a young studio, I already have a game in the soft launch, but no clear results, profitability. Why wouldn't it be a good idea for me to look, because I miss off funds, for example, look for an M&A? I think you mentioned this, like early profile companies may not be a good match for M&A, but can you elaborate further why it may not be a good idea either for the company looking for acquisition or even for the one acquiring, obviously?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I'd say, if you're going to run an M&A process, it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort. It's going to be very distracting. As Daniel already mentioned, he and his founders wanted to ensure that they would continue running their business and making, further growing Kolibri and making it an even more successful. So I think they did the absolute right decision, by hiring an investment bank and somebody professional to run that process. But, sometimes if you're a small, young studio, you might not be, you might just not know who to go to, or you might say, hey, we're not willing to pay the kind of fees to an investment bank, whatever. But then you run the risk of managing a very time-intensive process and preparing a tremendous amount of information that every buyer is going to ask for during due diligence, etc. And you might not even know what needs to get prepared or how and in what format and what buyers are looking for. So, it's a really serious time-intensive task. So I think you really got to be sure. I mean, of course, if you're very profitable, if you're growing rapidly, if you've had very early success, it's a completely different story, right? But if you're still trying to figure out, what to do, it might make more sense to merge rather than be acquired by a big player. It might make more sense to merge with another, maybe perhaps similar size studio that maybe does something really well that your current studio doesn't. So maybe you're great at back-end server engineering, but they are really great at game design. So then by combining forces, you actually have a much more attractive overall studio because you really have these two very complementary skill sets to bring to the table. So that's kind of more, I think the approach that I would say if you were kind of a young studio that's maybe looking to, improve or acquire other skill sets.
So one thing to add there that worked well in the past, which I saw, was to raise investment money, but also do a secondary round, meaning to also sell some shares yourself as a founder, because that way you will still be able to grow the company while de-risking a little bit and taking some money off the table. So most bigger companies in the gaming space, I would say, did this in the past. And it really helped the founding team to actually focus on growing the company without having to join a huge corporation already.
Yeah, thanks. Great also to have your input, Daniel, on that part, especially for the audience, but probably maybe some companies in funding or already looking for funding to consider different options as you try to grow, and not all of them might be adequate for you based on where you are a stage of development as a company. All right, so we have just a few minutes at the end, and I think we will close it here as I don't see any further questions. But thanks a lot, Shum and Daniel, for your time today and talking about studio acquisition. I think there's much more we can say, and probably for the audience to follow up. But thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day and take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.